The knife was small, but in the moonlight, it looked sharp enough to kill. That's the first thought. Clara Whitmore has 3 nights into her marriage to a stranger, a rancher named James Ashford, who offered her survival in exchange for becoming a mother to his silent, grieving son. But when 5-year-old Samuel stands beside her bed in the dead of night, clutching a kitchen blade with hollow eyes, Clara realizes this family's ghosts run deeper than she ever imagined. What secrets are buried in the frozen Nebraska soil? Why did Samuel's mother really die? And why does the boy keep drawing a dark figure that haunts his nightmares? If you want to uncover the truth alongside Clara, and discover whether desperation can transform into love, stay with me until the very end. You won't believe where this story leads, and if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this tale travels. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more cinematic stories that will stay with you long after they end. Clara Whitmore lay frozen in the bed that wasn't hers, in the house that wasn't hers, staring at the boy who wasn't hers. Not yet, not truly, as he stood beside the mattress with a kitchen blade gripped loosely in his small hand. His eyes were open but empty, dark hollows that reflected nothing of the child who'd given her a carved wooden horse just hours before, Samuel, 5 years old. Silent since his mother died. And now, sleepwalking with a weapon, Clara's breath came shallow and slow. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to grab the knife, to protect herself. But something deeper, something she couldn't name, kept her still. She'd learned in her 23 years that panic rarely saved anyone. Only calm could cut through chaos. "Samuel," she whispered. "Bad dream?" The boy didn't respond. Didn't blink. Just stood there, the blade catching silver light from the window, his bare feet pale against the dark floorboards. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her voice to remain gentle. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe." Slowly, so slowly it hurt, she sat up in bed. Her hands open and visible. No sudden movements. No fear in her expression, even though terror clawed at her throat. "Can you put the knife down for me?" Nothing. Then, as if a string had been cut, Samuel's fingers loosened. The blade clattered to the floor. His eyes blinked once, twice, and suddenly he was present again, a child, not a ghost. His gaze found hers, and his lower lip trembled. Clara didn't hesitate. She opened her arms. Samuel climbed onto the bed and curled against her chest, his small body shaking with silent sobs. She held him close, one hand on his back, the other cradling his head, and rocked slightly, just enough to remind him he wasn't alone. The knife lay forgotten on the floor. And Clara thought, 3 days ago, I was dying on a frozen prairie. Now I'm here. Married to a stranger. Mothering a child who holds knives in his sleep. This was not the life she'd imagined, but it was the only one she had left. 3 days earlier, the wind cut across the Nebraska prairie like a blade made of ice, slicing through Clara's threadbare coat as though the fabric were nothing more than paper. She stumbled forward, her boots, Thomas's boots, too large and full of holes, crunching through the frozen crust of snow that stretched endlessly in every direction. She had been walking for 2 days. Or was it 3? Time had lost meaning somewhere between burying her husband in a pauper's grave outside Omaha and being turned away from the 5th boarding house that wouldn't take a woman with no money and no references. The world had made its position clear. Clara Whitmore was alone, unwanted, and rapidly running out of options that didn't end with her frozen body discovered in a ditch come spring. Her hands had gone numb hours ago. She could no longer feel her fingers inside the thin gloves, could no longer feel her toes inside Thomas's boots. Everything he had owned now belonged to his creditors. Everything except these boots, which had been on his feet when he died, and which no one had bothered to claim from a dead man too poor to matter. Clara had taken them anyway. Widow's privilege, she'd thought bitterly. She cared now, though. She cared very much about staying alive long enough to regret every choice that had brought her to this frozen hell. The ranch house appeared like a mirage through the blowing snow, a dark shape against the white, substantial and real. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray line that meant warmth, shelter, life. Clara's heart lurched in her chest, hope and fear tangling together until she couldn't separate one from the other. This was her last chance. She knew it in her bones, in the trembling weakness of her legs, in the hollow ache of her stomach that had gone beyond hunger into something darker and more dangerous. If this door closed in her face, she wouldn't make it to another. The house was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories built of solid timber that spoke of prosperity, or at least of past prosperity. The barn beside it sagged slightly, its roof patched in places, but the main house stood firm. Clara climbed the porch steps, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the railing to stay upright. The wood was solid beneath her hand, real and unforgiving. She stood before the door for a long moment, gathering what remained of her courage. She knocked. The sound seemed too loud, too desperate, echoing across the frozen prairie like a gunshot. Footsteps sounded inside, heavy, deliberate, male. The door opened. The man who stood before her was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn work clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well-maintained. His face was weathered, carved by wind and sun into hard planes and sharp angles. Dark hair shot through with gray. Dark eyes that assessed her with the same cold calculation a man might use to evaluate a horse at auction. He said nothing. Just looked at her, waiting. Clara tried to speak and found her throat had closed. She swallowed, forced the words out past the tightness, past the shame of what she was about to do. "Please," she said. "I need work." The man's expression didn't change. "No work." The door started to close. "Please." Clara put her hand against the wood, stopping it, her voice breaking on the word. "I can cook, clean, mend, anything. I don't need wages. Just food and a place to sleep. A corner somewhere. I won't be trouble, I promise. I said no work." His voice was flat, empty of inflection. Not cruel exactly, but completely devoid of sympathy. "Then let me sleep in your barn." Clara begged, hating herself for it, hating the desperate crack in her voice, the tears that burned hot in her eyes despite the cold. "Just one night. Just until the storm passes. Please. I'll be gone by morning. You'll never even know I was there. The barn's not fit for sleeping." He studied her more carefully now, his gaze moving over her face, her threadbare coat, the boots that were obviously too large, the hollow desperation in her eyes. "When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. Yesterday. The day before. "I don't," she trailed off, realizing she genuinely didn't know. Something shifted in the man's face, though she couldn't read what it was. He stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "Come inside." Clara didn't move. Couldn't move. The sudden reversal felt like a trap. Felt dangerous in a way she couldn't articulate but understood in her bones. Men didn't invite strange women into their homes without reason. And those reasons were rarely generous. "I'm not." She straightened her spine, tried to summon some scrap of dignity. "I'm not offering that." For the first time, something like emotion crossed the man's face. A flicker of what might have been dark amusement or might have been contempt. "I'm not asking for it. You want to freeze on my porch, that's your choice. But if you want to live through the night, get inside." He turned and walked away, leaving the door open behind him. Clara stood frozen, by fear or cold or the surreal quality of the moment, she couldn't say. Then her body made the decision her mind couldn't, stumbling forward over the threshold into warmth that felt like being stabbed with 1,000 hot needles. The door closed behind her with a solid thunk. The interior of the house was dim, lit only by the fire burning in the large stone fireplace and a single oil lamp on the mantel. The main room was spacious but sparsely furnished, a scarred wooden table with 4 chairs. A rocking chair near the fire, shelves lined with basic supplies. Everything was clean but worn, functional without being comfortable, the house of a man who lived here but didn't care much about the living. "Sit." The man gestured to one of the chairs at the table. Clara sat, her legs giving out more than obeying the command. She watched as he moved to the stove, stoking the fire inside, setting a pot of something to warm. His movements were efficient, practiced, the actions of a man who'd been cooking for himself for a long time. "Name's James Ashford," he said without turning around. "This is Ashford Ranch." "What's yours, Clara Whitmore?" Her voice sounded strange in the quiet room. Thin and reedy. I was married. My husband died 3 weeks ago." "Fever, you got people?" "No," the word came out flat. "No people, no money, no anything." James said nothing to that. Just continued working at the stove. After a moment, he ladled something into a bowl, stew, from the smell of it, and set it in front of her along with a hunk of bread that looked like it had been baked days ago but was still edible. "Eat slow," he said. "You eat too fast after starving, you'll just sick it back up." Clara stared at the food, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the spoon. The first bite was heaven and agony combined, her stomach cramping immediately, her body not sure whether to accept the nourishment or reject it. She forced herself to eat slowly, taking small bites, letting each one settle before taking the next. James watched her from across the table, his expression unreadable. "How long you been walking?" he asked finally. 2 days. "Maybe 3. Clara took another careful bite. "I was in Omaha. Tried to find work there, but," she trailed off. There was no point explaining how quickly a widow with no skills and no references became invisible. "You walked from Omaha." It wasn't a question, but there was something in his voice now. Not quite disbelief, not quite respect. "That's 40 miles. I didn't have anywhere else to go." James leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You said you need work." "Yes." Clara set down her spoon, meeting his gaze directly despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Anything. I meant what I said. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm strong, or I was, before. I learn quick. I won't cause trouble, I don't need a cook." James's voice was matter-of-fact. "Don't need a cleaner or a mender, either. House is fine as it is." The hope that had kindled in Clara's chest died as quickly as it had sparked. "Oh, I need a wife." The words hung in the air between them like something physical, something she could reach out and touch if she dared. Clara stared at him, certain she'd misheard, certain the cold had damaged her hearing or her mind or both. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "What did you say?" "I need a wife." James repeated the words with the same inflection he might use to say he needed a new plow or a better milk cow. "That's the only position I have available." Clara's mind went blank, then began racing. This was it, then. The trap she'd sensed, the danger she'd known was waiting. Men didn't help women for free. There was always a price, always something they wanted in return, and this man wanted, "I have a son." James continued as though he were discussing terms for hiring ranch hands. "Samuel. He's 5 years old. His mother died 8 months ago. Influenza. Since then, he doesn't talk. Hasn't said a word to anyone." Evelyn's racing thoughts stumbled, caught off guard by this information. I'm sorry for your loss." James ignored the condolence. "I can't run this ranch alone and take care of a boy who won't speak, won't eat properly, won't sleep through the night. I need someone to care for the house and the child. In exchange, you get a roof, food, your name on the deed as my legal wife. You'd have rights here. Protection, protection." Clara heard herself echo the word, her voice sounding distant to her own ears, from the elements. From the kind of men who see a woman alone and think she's fair game. From starving to death walking across the prairie, James's expression remained neutral. But something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but maybe the ghost of understanding. "I'm not offering romance, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm offering survival. For both of us. You don't even know me. I know you walked 40 miles in winter with no food and boots that don't fit. I know you knocked on my door instead of lying down to die. That tells me what I need to know." Clara looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she still wore even though Thomas had been dead for weeks and the marriage had been more burden than blessing even before the end. "And what would you expect from me? As a wife, I told you what I expect. Care for the house. Care for Samuel. That's all. That's all." She looked up at him, searching his face for deception, for the lie that had to be hiding somewhere in this impossible offer. "You want a wife in name only. I want a mother for my son and someone to keep this house from falling apart around us." James stood, moving to pour himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "What I don't want is complications. My wife died 8 months ago. I'm not looking to replace her in my bed. I'm looking to keep my boy alive and my ranch running. If that's something you can do, we can help each other. If it's not, I'll give you food for the road and you can leave in the morning." Clara sat in silence, her mind spinning. The offer was insane. Marriage to a complete stranger, caring for a traumatized child, living on an isolated ranch with a man who looked at her with all the warmth of a winter stone. Every sensible instinct she possessed screamed at her to refuse, to thank him for the food and leave at first light, to take her chances anywhere but here. But where would she go? Back to Omaha, where she'd already been turned away from every door. Further west, into territory even more wild and unforgiving. She had no money, no prospects, no skills that anyone valued enough to pay for. The truth was brutal and inescapable. She would be dead within a week if she left this house. "I need to think about it," she said finally. James nodded as though he'd expected this. "You can sleep upstairs tonight. Second door on the right. There's a bed and clean linens. Tomorrow morning, you give me your answer, and if I say no, then I give you supplies and you go your way." He met her eyes directly. "I won't hold you here against your will, Mrs. Whitmore. That's not the kind of arrangement I'm proposing." Clara wanted to ask what kind of arrangement he was proposing. Wanted to understand what species of man made such an offer with such complete lack of emotion, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves now that food sat in her stomach and warmth surrounded her. Her eyes felt heavy, her thoughts sluggish. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow." James gestured toward the stairs, second door. "There's water in the pitcher if you need to wash." Clara stood on legs that shook with fatigue and made her way toward the stairs. She paused at the bottom, looking back at the man who had just proposed marriage with all the romance of a business transaction. "Mr. Ashford." "Yes, why me?" "You could advertise for a wife. Someone younger. Someone with references. Someone who isn't half dead from walking across the prairie." James was silent for a long moment, his face shadowed by the firelight. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Because you knocked on my door," he said. "Because you're desperate enough not to ask questions you don't want answers to. Because you need this as much as I do, which means you won't leave when things get hard." He paused. "And because my son needs someone who understands what it means to lose everything." Clara had no response to that. She climbed the stairs in silence. The room he directed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in faded quilts and a washstand in the corner. A single window looked out over the frozen prairie, darkness pressing against the glass. Clara stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at nothing, seeing everything. Her past, her present, her impossible future. She could hear movement downstairs, James banking the fire, moving around the main room with the heavy tread of a large man trying to be quiet. She wondered where he slept. Wondered where the boy was. Wondered what kind of woman agreed to marry a stranger for nothing more than the promise of survival. A desperate one, she thought. A woman with no other choices. Clara turned away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The room was warm, the bed soft beneath her, the house solid around her. Everything she'd been without for weeks, warmth, shelter, safety, was here, offered freely. All she had to do was say yes to a loveless marriage to a man she didn't know, to become mother to a child she'd never met, to tie her life to this isolated ranch in the middle of nowhere. all she had to do was give up any hope of something more. But what more had there ever been? Her marriage to Thomas had been arranged by families looking to combine resources. There had been no love there either, just duty and disappointment and eventually death. At least James Ashford was honest about what he wanted. At least this arrangement came with clear terms instead of false promises. Sleep came slowly, exhaustion warring with anxiety, her body grateful for the warm bed even as her mind churned with impossible questions. Sometime deep in the night, she heard footsteps in the hall, soft, hesitant, different from James's heavy tread. A child's footsteps. They paused outside her door. Clara held her breath, listening. Whoever stood there, Samuel. It must be Samuel. Didn't knock, didn't call out, just stood there in the darkness on the other side of the door, waiting for something, testing something. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. Clara lay awake until dawn, watching the darkness give way to gray light, listening to the house settle and creak around her. When morning finally came, pale and cold through the window, she rose and washed her face in the icy water from the pitcher, smoothed her hair as best she could, and went downstairs to give James Ashford her answer. He was already awake, standing at the stove making coffee. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral, waiting. "I have conditions," Clara said. Something shifted in James's face. Not quite relief, not quite satisfaction, but acknowledgement that she'd made her choice, and it was the one he'd been hoping for. "I'm listening. I want respect," Clara said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I'm not a servant. If I'm to be your wife, I want to be treated as a partner, not hired help." "Agreed. I want shared authority over the household and the boy. You don't undermine me, I don't undermine you. We make decisions together." "Agreed. I want honesty about the ranch's finances. If I'm putting my name on that deed, I have a right to know what I'm signing on to." "Agreed." Clara paused, surprised by how quickly he was accepting her terms, searching for the catch that had to be hiding somewhere. "I want time. I can't. I won't share a bed with you. Not now. Maybe not ever. That's not part of this arrangement," James said quietly. "I already told you what I expect. That hasn't changed. And what about Samuel? What if he doesn't accept me? What if I can't help him? Then we deal with it together." James set down his coffee cup. "Anything else?" Clara thought of the boy in the hallway last night, standing outside her door in the darkness. "I want you to give him time, too. Don't force him to call me mother. Don't force him to accept me. Let him come to it on his own terms. If he comes to it at all, fair enough." James extended his hand across the table. "Do we have an agreement, Mrs. Whitmore?" Clara looked at his hand, calloused, scarred by years of hard work, offering her something that felt both like salvation and surrender. She thought of the frozen prairie, the closed doors, the empty road stretching endlessly toward a future that held nothing but slow starvation or quick death. She thought of the boy in the hallway, silent and grieving. She thought of this house, solid and real, offering shelter from the killing cold. She reached out and took James Ashford's hand. "We have an agreement," she said. "But I have one more condition." James raised an eyebrow. "Waiting. I sleep in my own room until I say otherwise." "You gave up your bedroom last night." "I assume that's where you sleep." "It is. Then tonight, I'll move into it, and you can take the guest room." "The boy's room is next to the master bedroom," James said slowly. "If he wakes in the night, then I'll be closer to him than you would be." Clara met his eyes steadily. "If I'm to be his mother, Mr. Ashford, I should be the one he can reach in the dark." For the first time, something like respect flickered across James's face. "All right," he said. "Your room, then." They stood there in the morning light, hands still joined, both understanding that they'd just made a bargain that would change everything. Not a romantic proposal. Not a love match. Just two desperate people choosing survival and calling it marriage. "When?" Clara asked. "The circuit preacher comes through every 6 weeks. He's due in 3 days." James released her hand. "Until then, you're a guest in this house. After he performs the ceremony, your family. Those terms acceptable? Yes, good. James turned back to the stove. You should meet Samuel before breakfast. He's usually in his room until I call him down. Clara's heart lurched. What should I say to him? The truth. James poured coffee into a second cup and handed it to her. That you're staying. That you're going to help take care of him. That you're not trying to replace his mother. Will he understand? If he doesn't speak, he understands everything. He just doesn't answer. The pain in James's voice was brief but unmistakable. His mother used to sing to him in the mornings. Since she died, the mornings are hardest. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing courage from the heat. I can't sing. Then don't sing. Just be there. James met her eyes. That's all he needs. Someone who doesn't leave. The words hit harder than Clara expected, carrying weight she didn't fully understand. She nodded, set down her cup, and climbed the stairs toward the boys' room, each step feeling like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. She knocked softly on the door James had indicated. No answer. Samuel, she called gently. My name is Clara. May I come in? Silence. Clara opened the door slowly, giving the child time to protest if he wanted to. The room was small and neat, with a child-sized bed against one wall and a shelf of wooden toys and books. A 5-year-old boy sat on the bed, knees drawn up to his chest, watching her with dark eyes that looked too old for his young face. He looked like his father, same dark hair, same serious expression, but there was something gentle in his features that must have come from his mother. He wore clean clothes. His hair had been recently brushed. And everything about him spoke of a father who was trying desperately to take care of a child he didn't know how to reach. Hello, Samuel, Clara said quietly, staying in the doorway. Your father probably told you I'd be here. I'm Clara. The boy said nothing. Just watched her with those grave, assessing eyes. I'm going to be staying here for a while, Clara continued, keeping her voice gentle and even. I'm going to help your father with the house and the ranch, and I'm going to help take care of you, if that's all right. Still nothing. Clara's throat tightened. What did you say to a child who'd lost his mother, who'd retreated so far into silence that no one could reach him? How did you promise you wouldn't leave when every adult in his short life who'd promised that was already gone? I lost someone. Too, she said finally, the words coming without planning. My husband. He died a few weeks ago. So I understand a little bit about what it feels like when someone you love is just gone. Something flickered in Samuel's eyes. Not quite interest, but maybe recognition. The acknowledgement that this stranger understood something he thought was his alone. I'm not trying to replace your mother, Clara said firmly. I couldn't do that even if I wanted to. Your mother was yours, and nothing will ever change that. But I'm going to be here. Every morning, every night. And if you ever want to talk to me, or show me something, or just sit quietly together, I'll be here for that, too. Samuel continued to watch her, his expression unreadable. Clara took a small step into the room, then stopped. I know you don't know me yet. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I'm making you a promise anyway, I won't leave. No matter how hard things get, no matter how long it takes for you to feel safe with me, I will be here. You don't have to believe me now. But maybe someday you will. She waited, hoping for some response, a nod, a blink, anything that showed he'd heard and understood. Samuel slowly uncurled from his defensive position and slid off the bed. Clara's breath caught as he crossed the room toward her, certain he was going to ask her to leave, to go away. To stop pretending she could ever be what he needed. Instead, he reached under his bed and pulled out a worn wooden horse, small enough to fit in his hands, carved with obvious care, the paint fading from years of love and play. He held it out to her, his eyes never leaving her face. Clara knelt down, bringing herself to his level, understanding somehow that this was a test, an offering, a question posed without words. Is this your horse? She asked gently. Samuel nodded. It's beautiful. Did someone make it for you? Another nod. May I hold it? Samuel placed the wooden horse carefully in her hands. It was warm from being held, smooth from countless hours of small fingers running over the carved surface. Clara turned it over gently, seeing the detail in the work, the flowing mane, the carefully shaped hooves, the eyes that seemed almost alive. This is very special, she said softly, handing it back to him. Thank you for showing it to me. Samuel didn't take it back. Instead, he closed her fingers around it and stepped away, his meaning clear. It was hers now. At least for a while. A gift. A tentative bridge across the silence. Clara's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. I'll take very good care of it, she promised. And when you want it back, you just let me know. The boy nodded once, then climbed back onto his bed, resuming his watchful position. But something in his posture had changed. Some small tension easing, Clara stood, clutching the wooden horse like it was made of gold. Thank you, Samuel, she said. I'll see you at breakfast. She closed the door quietly and leaned against the wall in the hallway, her legs suddenly weak. James was standing at the top of the stairs, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He gave it to me, Clara said, holding up the wooden horse. Why would he? That horse hasn't left his possession since his mother died, James said quietly. He sleeps with it. Won't let me touch it. He paused. His mother carved it for him. The week before she got sick, Clara looked down at the wooden toy in her hands, understanding now the weight of what Samuel had given her. Not just a toy. A piece of his mother. A piece of his heart. The ceremony is in 3 days, James said. But I think the decision's already been made. By both of you. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the emotion lodged in her throat. James descended the stairs, leaving her alone in the hallway with a wooden horse and a promise she'd made to a silent child, a promise she had no idea how to keep, but would die trying to honor. 3 days, she thought. 3 days until this impossible arrangement becomes legally binding. 3 days until I become wife to a stranger and mother to a boy who's already lost too much. 3 days to figure out how to build a life out of desperation and necessity and the fragile hope that survival could somehow become something more. Clara went to her room, her temporary room, soon to be permanent, and placed the wooden horse carefully on the nightstand where she could see it. Then she dressed in her threadbare clothes, went downstairs, and began learning how to live in a house that had forgotten what living meant. Clara woke on the 3rd night of her marriage to find Samuel standing beside the bed, his dark eyes empty, his small hand gripping the kitchen blade she'd used to slice bread that afternoon. For a moment, just a heartbeat, she saw herself as she must have looked to him, a stranger in his mother's bed, in his mother's house, wearing his mother's ring. James had given it to her during the brief ceremony with the circuit preacher. Neither of them acknowledging the weight of that exchange, but she didn't scream. Didn't move. Just watched the boy who wasn't quite present, who stood in the space between sleep and waking with a weapon in his hand. Samuel, she whispered. Bad dream? Nothing. It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe. She sat up slowly, her hands open, her voice gentle. Can you put the knife down for me? Samuel's fingers loosened. The blade clattered to the floor. He blinked, and suddenly he was there again, present, aware, and terribly frightened. Clara opened her arms. He climbed onto the bed and pressed himself against her chest, his body shaking with silent sobs. She held him close. Rocking slightly, her hand on his back, and felt the wooden horse, still on the nightstand where she'd kept it, watching them both. After a long while, Samuel's breathing evened. His grip on her nightgown loosened. But he didn't let go. Clara glanced at the doorway and found James there, his face shadowed, one hand gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles had gone white. How long has he been doing this? She asked quietly. 2 months. James's voice was rough. Since winter set in. He never hurt anyone. Just walks. Carries things. Knives, tools, once a rope. He paused. The doctor said it's the trauma. Said it might stop when he feels safe again. And the drawings?" Clara asked, remembering the papers she'd found tucked under Samuel's mattress that afternoon. Crude sketches of a tall figure, always drawn in black, always standing in doorways or windows. "He draws a man." Over and over, James's jaw tightened. "He calls it the Dark Man. Started after Maggie died. Won't tell me who it is. Won't tell me if it's real or just." He stopped. "I don't know if he's remembering something or imagining it." Clara looked down at the boy in her arms, at the way his small fingers clutched her nightgown, at the exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Has anyone else ever seen this man?" "No, but you believe Samuel saw something." James was quiet for a long moment. "I was gone the night Maggie died," he said finally. "Rode to town for medicine. When I came back the next morning, she was," his voice broke. "She was already gone. Samuel was sitting beside her bed. He hasn't spoken since." He met Clara's eyes across the darkness. "I don't know what he saw. But something happened that night. Something I wasn't here to stop." Clara held Samuel tighter, understanding now why James had been so desperate for help, why he'd offered marriage to a stranger, why he couldn't bear to be alone with his grief and his guilt. "Go back to bed," she said softly. "I'll stay with him tonight." James nodded and retreated, his footsteps heavy down the hall. Clara lay down with Samuel still curled against her side, the knife still on the floor where it had fallen, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. The days that followed fell into careful rhythm. Clara rose before dawn to make coffee and breakfast, learning the kitchen by trial and error, burning biscuits and overcooking eggs until she found the right timing for the ancient cast-iron stove. James worked the ranch from sunup to sundown, repairing fences and tending the aging cattle, coming in only for meals and the necessary interactions that passed for conversation. Samuel watched them both with his grave, silent eyes, moving through the house like a small ghost, never causing trouble, never asking for anything, but he began to leave things for Clara: the wooden horse on the breakfast table, a carefully folded blanket on her chair, once a handful of winter berries that must have taken him hours to find in the frozen landscape, gifts. Or maybe tests. Clara accepted them all with quiet gratitude, never pushing, never demanding more than he was ready to give. A week into the marriage, Mrs. Henderson arrived, a sturdy widow from the neighboring ranch who James had asked to check in periodically. She was a practical woman with kind eyes and capable hands, and she took one look at Clara and said, "You've got the look of someone holding on by their fingernails, dear." "What can I do to help?" Clara wanted to say everything but settled for, "Show me how to manage the chickens without getting pecked." Mrs. Henderson laughed, a warm, genuine sound, and spent the afternoon teaching Clara the rhythms of ranch life, chattering comfortably about weather and neighbors and the price of grain. But when Samuel appeared in the doorway, Mrs. Henderson's expression softened into something sadder. "Poor lamb," she murmured. "Maggie would be heartbroken to see him like this." "You knew her?" Clara asked, surprised by the spike of jealousy that accompanied the question. Jealousy of a dead woman. How ridiculous! Everyone knew Maggie. She taught at the schoolhouse before she married James. Sweetest soul you'd ever meet. Mrs. Henderson paused, her gaze distant. She was terrified the last few months, though. Said she felt watched. Followed. James thought she was just anxious about the baby. Clara's hands stilled on the basket of eggs she'd been collecting. "Baby," she miscarried. 3 months before she died. Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped. Lost it during one of James's trips to town. She was alone except for Samuel. I think that's when the fear really set in. She looked at Clara directly. "I'm telling you this because you should know what you're walking into. This family isn't just grieving. They're haunted." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to Samuel's breathing in the next room, thinking about Maggie, about a woman who'd been afraid, who'd lost a child, who died alone while her husband was away, a woman who might have seen something. Someone, the dark man. Clara rose and went downstairs, moving quietly through the house until she reached James's small office, really just a corner of the main room with a desk and a few ledgers. She lit a candle and began searching, not sure what she was looking for but certain there had to be something, some clue that everyone had missed. She found Maggie's journal in the bottom drawer, tucked beneath old newspapers and receipts. Clara hesitated, her hand on the worn leather cover. This felt like a violation, reading a dead woman's private thoughts, but if those thoughts could help Samuel, help James, help her understand what she'd married into, she opened the journal. The early entries were mundane, weather observations, recipes, notes about the garden. But as Clara read deeper, the tone shifted. March 15, 1883, I saw him again today. Standing at the edge of the property, just watching the house. James says I'm imagining things, that no one has reason to watch us. But I know what I saw. April 2nd, the baby is gone. Dr. Holloway says these things happen, that I'm young and can try again. But I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. That we're not safe here. May 20th, Samuel drew a picture of the man today. He won't tell me who it is, but the way he drew it, tall, dark coat, standing in our doorway, it's exactly what I've been seeing. I'm not imagining this. Someone is watching us. June 7th, I wrote to Eleanor, begging her to send money for the beekeeping venture. But it's not really about bees. I need a reason to leave, to take Samuel somewhere safe. James won't listen. He thinks I'm hysterical with grief. Maybe I am. But I know what I know. The entries ended there, 3 weeks before Maggie's death. Clara's hands trembled as she closed the journal. Maggie had been afraid. Had seen someone. Had tried to protect her son. And now Samuel saw the same figure. What are you doing? Clara spun to find James standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I found Maggie's journal, she said, deciding honesty was the only option. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have. What does it say? His voice was flat, but something flickered in his eyes. Not anger. Fear. Clara handed him the journal and watched as he read, watched his face crumble as he absorbed his dead wife's terror, her desperate attempts to protect their child, her conviction that something was wrong. When he finished, he set the journal down carefully, his hands shaking. I failed her, he said. She tried to tell me, and I thought grief was making her paranoid. The miscarriage, the isolation, he stopped. I didn't believe her, James. She died because I wasn't here. Because I didn't take her seriously. Because his voice broke entirely. Clara crossed the room and took his hands, forcing him to look at her. You didn't kill her. Influenza killed her. But if she was right, if someone really was watching, then we need to find out who. For Samuel's sake. James stared at her. You believe it? That someone was here. Samuel sees him, Clara said. Maggie saw him. That's two people who had no reason to lie. So yes. I believe it. She paused. The question is, who? And why? The answer came 3 days later, delivered not through investigation but through violence. Clara was alone in the house. James had ridden to town for supplies. Samuel was napping upstairs. When she heard the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen, she rushed in to find the window shattered, cold air pouring through the broken pane, and a rock the size of a fist lying in the middle of the floor, surrounded by glittering shards. Wrapped around the rock was a piece of paper, secured with twine. Clara picked it up carefully, her heart hammering, and read the message scrawled in harsh, angular handwriting. Ashford, you have 2 weeks to pay what you owe. After that, the ranch is mine. Don't bother running. I always collect. SC, Clara's mind raced. She'd been managing the household finances since the wedding. Had seen the ledgers, knew the ranch was struggling but not. She ran to James's office and pulled out the account books, searching for anything she'd missed. There, in the back of the oldest ledger, written in James's careful hand, loan from Silas Crane, $800. Due, October 1883, October had been 2 months ago, and the name, Silas Crane, tickled something in Clara's memory. She'd heard Mrs. Henderson mention it once, in passing, with a bitterness that suggested history. Clara was still staring at the ledger when James returned, his arms full of supplies. He took one look at her face, at the broken window, at the rock on the table, and the color drained from his skin. "When were you going to tell me?" Clara asked. Her voice surprisingly calm. James set down the supplies slowly. "I thought I had more time." "Time for what?" "To lose everything. To put Samuel and me in danger without even warning us. I was trying to protect you." James's voice rose. "This is my problem, my debt, we're married." Clara slammed the ledger onto the table. "Your problems are my problems. That was the agreement. Honesty. Partnership. Or did you lie about that, too?" James flinched as though she'd struck him. "I didn't lie. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Silas Crane owns most of the land around here. He offered me a loan 2 years ago to expand the herd. I was desperate. Took it. Then Maggie got sick, and I needed money for doctors, medicine. I used what I had left trying to save her. The herd got disease last spring. I lost half of them. I couldn't." He stopped, his voice breaking. "I've been negotiating with Silas for months, trying to buy time. He agreed to wait until spring. But now he wants the ranch." Clara finished. She looked at the threatening note, at the initials SC, and something cold settled in her stomach. "James. What does Silas Crane look like?" James blinked, thrown by the change in topic. "Tall. Dark coat. He's got a scar on his hand from a barbed wire accident years ago." "Why?" Clara walked to Samuel's room and returned with one of the boy's drawings, the crude sketch of the dark man. "Is this him?" James stared at the drawing. At the tall figure in the long dark coat. At the way Samuel had drawn a dark mark on the figure's hand, not just a random detail. "A scar, Jesus Christ," James whispered. "Silas was here. The night Maggie died, the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. James had been in town. Maggie had been alone with Samuel, sick and frightened. And Silas Crane, the man who held their debt, who wanted their land, had come to the house. Had he threatened her? Frightened her? Made her condition worse, or had he simply stood there, watching, waiting for James to fail? "He's been waiting for you to lose everything," Clara said quietly. "Maybe he's been helping it along. Making sure you couldn't pay. Making sure," she stopped, unable to finish the thought, "making sure Maggie died." James sank into a chair, his face ashen. "I need to go to the sheriff." Tell him what?" Clara asked. "That a child drew a picture. That your dead wife's journal says someone was watching. The sheriff will laugh you out of his office." She paused. "Mrs. Henderson told me Silas has the law in his pocket. If you go to the sheriff, Silas will know. And then they'd lose everything. The ranch. Their safety. Maybe their lives. There has to be another way," Clara said. She thought of Maggie's journal, of the letter to Eleanor about money for bees. The journal mentioned Eleanor. Maggie's sister in Omaha. She offered to lend money. James looked up. That was for bees. For starting a business. Not for paying off a debt," Clara finished. "I know. But what if we explained the situation? What if we asked her to honor the offer anyway, for Samuel's sake? Even if she agreed, we'd never get the money in time. Mail to Omaha and back takes at least 10 days. We have 2 weeks, then I'll go to Omaha myself," Clara said. "I'll leave tomorrow. Ride hard. Get there in 2 days. Talk to Eleanor in person. Convince her to help." James stood abruptly. "That's insane. You don't know the route. Don't know the dangers. A woman traveling alone. I walked 40 miles through a winter storm with nothing but desperation keeping me upright. Clara cut him off. I think I can manage a 2-day ride to Omaha, alone. Would you rather lose the ranch? The question hung between them, sharp and undeniable. James stared at her, something like awe flickering across his face. You've been here barely a month, and you're willing to risk yourself for a place that isn't even really yours. It is mine, Clara said firmly. I'm your wife. My name is on that deed. This is my home, my family, my fight as much as yours. She paused, then added more softly, unless you don't want it to be. Want it to be? James crossed to stand before her. Clara, I married you because I was desperate and you were convenient. Because I needed someone to keep my house from falling apart. He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. But what you've become, what you are to us now, that's not convenience. That's not desperation. He stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily. If you want to go to Omaha, I won't stop you. But I'm going with you. You can't. Samuel needs someone here, and if we both go, I'll stay. The voice came from the doorway. Samuel stood there, his wooden horse tucked under his arm, his expression determined. I'll be brave, he said, the first full sentence Clara had heard him speak since that first night. I'll stay here and take care of the animals. James started toward him. Son, you're 5 years old, almost 6, Samuel corrected, his chin lifting. And I know how to feed the chickens and give the cow hay and keep the fires going. Mrs. Henderson can check on me if you ask her. He straightened his small shoulders. I can do it. I'm not scared. Clara looked at this child who'd been silent with grief just weeks ago, now standing tall and offering to be alone so his parents could fight for their home. The transformation was staggering. Heartbreaking. Magnificent. We'll ask Mrs. Henderson to stay here with you, James said finally. She's known you since you were born. Would that be acceptable? Samuel nodded, satisfied with the compromise. They spent the rest of the day preparing. James rode to the Henderson ranch and returned with Mrs. Henderson herself, who asked no questions beyond what needed doing and when they'd be back. You take care of your business, she told them, already rolling up her sleeves. The boy and I will manage just fine. That night, Clara was braiding her hair for the journey when a soft knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find James standing in the hallway, his expression uncertain in the lamplight. Can I come in? She stepped back, allowing him entry. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, the master bedroom that had been his until he'd given it to her. That still bore traces of the life he'd shared with Maggie. I wanted to thank you, he said finally. For what you're doing. For what you've already done. He paused, searching for words. When I asked you to marry me, I never expected, I didn't think, neither did I, Clara admitted. I was just trying to survive. Find a place to sleep, food to eat, a reason to keep walking. She met his eyes directly. And now I'm fighting for a home. For a family. For you and Samuel. For this life we're building together. James crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, framing her face with his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses. If we lose the ranch, he said quietly. If this all falls apart, you and Samuel, you're still my family. That doesn't change. We're not going to lose, Clara said, leaning into his touch despite herself. I won't let us. He kissed her then, sudden and fierce and desperate, and Clara kissed him back with equal intensity, all the fear and hope and impossible affection she'd been trying not to feel pouring out in that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. We should sleep, he said, making no move to leave. Long ride tomorrow. We should, Clara agreed, equally still. They stood together in the lamplight, the precipice of something more looming before them. Both understanding that crossing it now would only complicate what was already impossibly tangled. Finally, James stepped back, his hands falling away from her face. Thank you, he said again. For choosing us. For staying. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, and Clara was alone with her racing heart and the ghost of his kiss still burning on her lips. She touched her fingers to her mouth, feeling the warmth there, and thought, this wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to feel this, but she did, and tomorrow, she would ride into danger for it. They left before dawn, Clara and James riding side by side through the frozen Nebraska landscape, the horse's breath misting in the cold air. Samuel and Mrs. Henderson waved from the porch, two small figures growing smaller as the ranch disappeared behind them. Clara didn't look back. Couldn't. If she saw Samuel's brave face one more time, she might lose her nerve. The ride to Omaha was hard and cold, but the weather held. They stopped only when necessary, pushing through exhaustion and discomfort with single-minded determination. James proved to be good company despite the circumstances. He pointed out landmarks, shared stories about the territory, filled the long hours with conversation that kept fatigue at bay. Clara found herself learning things about him she'd never thought to ask. That he'd been born in Ohio and came west with his parents as a teenager. That he'd learned ranching from his father, who died the year before Samuel was born. That Maggie had been a schoolteacher before they'd married, and had taught Samuel his letters before illness claimed her. She would have liked you, James said as they made camp the first night, building a small fire against the cold. Maggie, I mean. She always said I needed someone who'd push back. Who wouldn't let me wallow when things got hard. Is that what I do? Clara asked, amused despite her exhaustion. Push back, constantly. James smiled, taking the sting from the words. It's infuriating. And exactly what we needed. They reached Omaha late the second day, tired and filthy and running on pure determination. Eleanor's address from Maggie's letter led them to a neat house on a respectable street, lamplight glowing warmly in the windows. Clara's heart hammered as James knocked on the door. A woman answered, younger than Clara expected, perhaps 30, with Maggie's eyes and a cautious smile. Can I help you, Eleanor? James asked. Eleanor Thompson, yes. The smile faded to confusion. I'm sorry, do I know you? I'm James Ashford. Maggie's husband. He paused, the present tense still difficult. Was Maggie's husband. This is my wife, Clara. Understanding and grief crashed across Eleanor's face in equal measure. James. Oh my heavens, come in. Come in, she ushered them inside. Calling for her husband, for tea, her hands fluttering with the need to help, to serve, to fill the awkward space with action. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral, Eleanor said once they were seated in her tidy parlor. We were traveling, and by the time we got your letter, it's all right, James said, though his voice suggested it wasn't. Not really, we're not here about that. We're here because we need help, they explained everything. The debt. The deadline. The letter offering money for bees that had never been claimed. Eleanor listened with growing distress. Her husband William, a quiet man with kind eyes, sitting beside her with his hand over hers. Of course we'll help. Eleanor said when they'd finished. Maggie was my sister. If she were here, if she could ask me herself, her voice broke. Of course we'll help. The relief was so intense that Clara felt dizzy with it. We'll pay you back, she promised. However long it takes, we'll pay every penny. We'll work out terms that are fair, William interrupted gently. But right now, you both look like you're about to fall over. Eleanor, make up the spare room. They can stay the night, and we'll handle the financial arrangements in the morning. They stayed the night, and in the morning William went to his bank and withdrew enough to cover not just the debt to Silas Crane, but a small surplus besides. For the bees, he said, pressing the money into James's hands. Maggie's dream shouldn't die with her. The ride back was faster, lighter, powered by hope instead of desperation. They reached the ranch with 2 days to spare, finding Samuel and Mrs. Henderson managing beautifully, the house warm, the animals fed, everything exactly as they'd left it. Samuel launched himself into their arms with a whoop of joy, chattering about everything that had happened while they were gone, secure in the knowledge that his parents had returned just as they'd promised. The next morning, James rode alone to Silas Crane's property, a sprawling estate that made the Ashford ranch look like a poor relation. Silas received him in a study that reeked of tobacco and power, a tall man in a dark coat, his scarred hand resting on the desk between them like a threat. "Ashford," Silas said, his voice smooth as oil. "I wasn't expecting you. Thought you'd wait until the deadline to beg for more time." "I'm not begging." James set a leather pouch on the desk. "I'm paying." In full. Silas's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I see. And where did a man on the brink of ruin suddenly find $800? That's not your concern. Here's your money." "We're done." James turned to leave. "Not quite." The words stopped him. James turned back slowly. "What?" Silas leaned back in his chair, his scarred hand drumming on the desk. "I've reconsidered the terms. You see, I purchased your debt from the bank 3 months ago. Which means I now own the note. And I've decided that cash isn't sufficient repayment." James's blood turned to ice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want half ownership of the Ashford Ranch. Not as collateral. As payment." Silas's smile widened. "You can keep living there, keep working it. But half of everything you earn belongs to me. And if you refuse, I'll take you to court. The sheriff will back my claim. You'll lose everything." James's hands clenched into fists. "You can't change the terms. I can do whatever I want." Silas stood, walking around the desk. "That's what power is, Ashford. The ability to change the rules when they no longer suit you." He paused, his eyes glittering. "You have 2 days to sign the papers. After that, I take the whole ranch." "Your choice." James rode home in a haze of fury and despair, the money in his saddlebag now worthless, the trap closing tighter than ever. Clara met him at the door, took one look at his face, and knew. He refused the money. Worse. James dismounted, his movements heavy. "He wants half the ranch. Says he owns the note now, can set whatever terms he wants." Clara's mind raced. "That's not legal." "He can't just, he can if the sheriff backs him. And the sheriff's been in Silas's pocket for years." James tied off the horse, his movements sharp with barely contained rage. "We're beaten, Clara. We fought, we tried, and we're beaten." "No," the word came out fierce. James looked at her, something like despair in his eyes. "Clara, no," she repeated. "We're not beaten. We're close. We just need to think." She grabbed his hand, pulled him into the house where Mrs. Henderson was keeping Samuel occupied in the kitchen. "Maggie's journal," Clara said, already moving toward James's office. "She wrote that she saw Silas. That Samuel drew him. What if," she stopped, an idea forming, "what if we can prove Silas was here the night Maggie died? What if we can show he had a hand in her death?" "We can't prove that," James said. "It's a child's drawing and a dead woman's journal." "No court would." "Then we don't go to court." Clara's eyes were bright with desperate determination. "We go to Silas. We confront him with what we know. We make him think we have evidence. He'll never admit to anything, maybe not. But if he's guilty, if he did something that night, he'll be scared enough to back down. To take the money and walk away rather than risk exposure." It was a gamble. A desperate, dangerous gamble, but it was all they had. They rode to Silas's estate at dusk, leaving Samuel with Mrs. Henderson and bringing Maggie's journal and Samuel's drawings. Silas received them in his study again. Clearly surprised to see Clara. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his tone mocking. "How domestic. Brought your wife to beg for you." "I'm not here to beg," Clara said calmly. "I'm here to ask you a question." She set the journal on Silas's desk, open to the entry dated 3 weeks before Maggie's death. "Why were you at the Ashford Ranch the night Maggie died?" Silas's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Not quite fear. But close." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Maggie saw you," Clara continued. "She wrote about it. Over and over. A man watching the house. Standing at the property line. And then, she placed Samuel's drawing beside the journal. The night she died. Samuel saw you, 2. Silas looked at the crude drawing, the tall figure in a dark coat, the scar on the hand, and his jaw tightened. A child's imagination. Samuel drew your scar, James cut in, his voice deadly quiet. He was 5 years old. He'd never met you. The only way he could know about that scar is if he saw you. In our house. The night his mother died, Silas stood abruptly. This is absurd. You can't prove, we don't need to prove it to a judge, Clara said. We just need to prove it to the town. To your neighbors. To everyone who does business with you. She leaned forward. How do you think people will react when they hear that Silas Crane was at the Ashford ranch the night Maggie died? When they learn that a dying woman and her terrified child both identified you? When they start wondering what you were doing there? Why you didn't call for help, why you let her die alone, they'll wonder, James added, if you wanted her to die. If killing a debtor's wife was part of your plan to take his land, Silas's face flushed red. You're accusing me of murder. I'm stating facts, Clara said. Maggie saw you. Samuel saw you. You were there. And now you're trying to steal their home. She paused. Take the money, Mr. Crane. Cancel the debt. Walk away. Because if you don't, we'll make sure everyone in 3 counties knows you were there that night. And even if you're innocent, even if you did nothing wrong, the suspicion will destroy you. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. Finally, Silas laughed, a cold, bitter sound. You're bluffing. No one will believe you, maybe, Clara said. But are you willing to take that risk? More silence. Then, I want to talk to the boy. Absolutely not, James said immediately. I need to know what he saw. Silas's voice was sharp. If he's going to accuse me, he's not accusing anyone, Clara interrupted. He's a traumatized child who drew a picture. But if you insist on seeing him, we'll bring him here. We'll let him look at you. And if he reacts the way children react to the man who frightened his dying mother, she let the implication hang. Silas stared at her for a long moment, and Clara saw it, fear. Real, genuine fear. He had been there. Had done something, maybe not killed Maggie directly. But done something he didn't want known. Fine, Silas said finally, his voice tight. I'll take the money. $800. Debt cancelled. But I want it in writing that this, he gestured at the journal and drawing, never gets mentioned again. To anyone, agreed, James said. They signed papers right there, Silas's hand shaking slightly as he wrote, and by the time the sun set fully, the debt was cancelled, the ranch was theirs, and Silas Crane was watching them ride away with an expression that promised he'd never forget this humiliation. He was there, Clara said once they were out of earshot. He did something. I know, James said quietly. And we'll never prove exactly what. But at least he's gone now, at least Samuel was safe, at least they still had a home. A month later, spring arrived with unexpected swiftness. The frozen prairie softened into mud, then greened almost overnight with new grass that rippled like water under the constant wind. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching James and Samuel work together in the yard, preparing the ground where Maggie's beehives would soon stand, and felt something close to contentment settle in her chest. The money from Eleanor had saved them from Silas, and the surplus had been enough to purchase 3 hives and a starter colony from a beekeeper 2 counties over. James had thrown himself into the project with an intensity that surprised Clara, reading through Maggie's journals late into the night, treating the work like a sacred trust. It's what she wanted, he'd explained one evening. Feels wrong not to honor that. Samuel thrived under the attention of 2 parents instead of 1, his vocabulary expanding daily, his laughter becoming as common as his tears had once been, and Clara had moved into the master bedroom permanently, not just sleeping there but living there, sharing the space with James in a way that felt both natural and terrifying. They hadn't spoken about the kiss before Omaha, hadn't acknowledged the way their relationship had shifted from transaction to something deeper. But it was there, in the way James's hand lingered on hers when passing the coffee pot, in the way he'd started calling her, my wife, instead of just Clara, in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. One evening in late April, Clara was reading in the bedroom when James came in, his expression uncertain. "Can we talk?" Clara set down her book, her heart suddenly racing. "Of course." James sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped between his knees. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," he said carefully. "About the terms we set at the beginning." Clara's throat tightened. And I want to change them." He looked at her directly, his dark eyes vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I don't want separate rooms anymore, Clara. I don't want to keep pretending this is just a business arrangement when we both know it stopped being that months ago." He paused. "I love you. Didn't plan to. Didn't expect it. But I do. You and Samuel, you're my whole world now." The words Clara had been holding back for weeks spilled out before she could stop them. "I love you, too. Both of you. This whole impossible, beautiful life we've built from nothing." James kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, Clara saw Samuel watching from the doorway with a grin that suggested he'd been eavesdropping shamelessly and approved wholeheartedly. "Does this mean Mama can stay in here forever?" Samuel asked. "Forever," James confirmed. "If she wants to, I want to," Clara said, pulling Samuel onto the bed between them. Very much. They settled together, the three of them, James, Clara, and Samuel, understanding that family wasn't something you were born into, but something you built with patience and courage and the choice to keep showing up even when it was hard. That night, after Samuel had been tucked into his own bed, Clara lay in James's arms and felt, for the first time in years, completely safe. "Thank you," James whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For knocking on my door. For staying. For choosing us." "Thank you for opening it," Clara whispered back. "For giving me a reason to stay." Spring turned to summer, and with it came the first honey harvest. The bees thrived under James's careful management, and when they extracted the first frames heavy with golden honey, the whole family gathered to taste it. "It's perfect," Samuel declared, honey smeared across his face. "Maggie would be proud," Clara said softly, and James nodded, his eyes bright with tears he didn't try to hide. In June, Clara began to suspect she was pregnant. By July, it was confirmed. Samuel was beside himself with excitement, already planning everything he'd teach his new sibling, already claiming the role of protective big brother with fierce determination. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" he asked one evening. "We won't know until the baby comes," Clara explained. "Either way, I'll take care of them," Samuel said seriously. "Like Papa takes care of us." The baby, a girl, was born in February, during a snowstorm that reminded Clara of the night she'd first knocked on the Ashford Ranch door, but this time, there was no desperation, no fear. Only love and warmth and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. They named the baby Margaret, after James's first wife, honoring the woman who'd given them Samuel and the dreams that had saved them. Eleanor and William came to visit in March, bringing gifts and tears and the joy of family reunited. "She's beautiful," Eleanor said, holding baby Margaret with gentle reverence. "Maggie would be so happy, she's part of our story," Clara said. "She always will be." On a warm May evening, the whole family sat on the porch, James in the rocking chair with Margaret sleeping against his shoulder, Clara beside him with Samuel on her lap, all of them watching the sun set over the prairie. "Tell me the story again," Samuel requested, as he did most evenings. "About how you and Mama found each other." James and Clara exchanged glances, the story polished smooth with repetition. "It was the coldest winter anyone could remember," Clara began. "And I was lost on the frozen prairie with nowhere to go." They told the story together, weaving the tale of desperation and survival and the choice to build something beautiful from broken pieces. And when the sun finally set, when the children were asleep and the stars came out, Clara and James sat together in the gathering darkness and understood that home was never a place. It was always the people who refused to leave, who chose each other, every single day. "Thank you for journeying with Clara, James, and Samuel through the frozen plains of Nebraska and into the warmth of a family reborn from ashes." If this story moved you, Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring more powerful, emotional tales to life. Share your thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Did you see the twist coming? And most importantly, do you believe broken people can truly heal each other? Until next time, remember, love isn't found. It's built. One choice at a time.